This recorded video focuses on a population that is often left out of the conversation on college men of color, that being student veterans. The title of this session is Serving Those Who Served Us, Veteran Men of Color in a Community College. Our goal here is to help provide a framework of understanding that can be useful in building support structures that enable the success of these students. Many of the comments and thoughts that you will see highlighted throughout this presentation were directly contributed by one of our graduate students and researchers, Lieutenant Colonel Tom De La Garza of the United States Army. While in the midst of supporting this project, Tom was called back to service. His framing and sense-making are intentionally carried throughout this video. One of the issues that Tom has raised in his discussions with us is the critique of the deficit perspective that is often lumped onto veteran men. Specifically, these men have been portrayed in the scholarly literature and in practitioner discourse as being mentally unstable, dangerous, and unpredictable. We believe that this deficit notion is rooted in stereotypes about these men that are accentuated by the pervasive racial, ethnic, and gender stereotypes facing men of color in society as a whole. This session is designed to shed light on the lives, experiences, perceptions, and outcomes of veteran men of color in the American Community College. This session is organized around three primary objectives. They include exploring trends and challenges facing veteran men of color in the community college, gaining insights on emerging findings that are being illuminated from research on these men, and to spur dialogue on strategies that can support the success of veteran men. As always, we encourage you to engage us throughout Twitter. By all means, please use the hashtag M2C3 as well as our respective Twitter handles that are presented here on the slide as you engage us by way of this medium. For those who may be joining us on our webinars for the first time, we are the Minority Male Community College Collaborative, and we partner with community colleges across the country to build capacity that's necessary to serve men of color or men who've been historically underrepresented and underserved in post-secondary education. In doing so, we host a national consortium on college men of color, which enables us to bring colleges together to share insights, information, and resources about strategies and practices that work to support men of color. We are also heavily engaged in producing scholarly literature, books, peer-reviewed journal articles, and other works that focus on men of color in community colleges. And we engage in a range of direct trainings and professional development with college faculty and staff, again with the focus on enhancing student success and enhancing services to men of color in community colleges. Our work is supported by a number of people with whom we have to acknowledge. First are our affiliate partners, which include Achieving the Dream, the Association of Community College Trustees, the African American Male Education Network and Development, the Community College League of California, the National Associations of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, the League of Innovation in the Community College, and the American College Personnel Association. We also have a host of advisory board members who support us and provide important advice and insights as we engage this work, and we want to thank and acknowledge them for their contributions as well. If you haven't already done so, please visit the virtual discussion board that we've established for the consortium. It's available. You can use this space to post questions and share resources and information about student success for men of color. And of course, if you need access, information to access the video, the virtual discussion board, please feel free to email us at m2c3@sdsu.edu. We also invite you to take a look at the online certificate program that we've developed that focuses on teaching men of color in community colleges. You can learn more about this program at Cora Learning at www.coralearning.org. We have two upcoming webinars for the National Consortium. The next one will be hosted next Thursday November 19th. And that's going to be an information sharing session that'll focus primarily on mentoring programs. We'll also have a follow-up to one of our earlier topics, gaining institutional buy-in for efforts to serve men of color, the executive's perspective. And that webinar will take place on December 3rd, 2015. As we transition into the content of the webinar, we'd like to note that our work is often inspired by the words that are attributed to W. Edward Deming and Paul Battalion, who said that every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results it gets. We advocate bringing this perspective and thinking down to a more personal level that helps to demonstrate the role that we as educators have as a part of this system. We say that every university, every college, every department, and every classroom are perfectly designed to achieve the results that it gets. From a systems perspective, when we see the widespread disparities and challenges that face men of color in general, and veteran men of color in particular, we must consider how the system itself and our roles in it is perfectly designed to achieve the outcomes it is producing. When you see the challenges expressed on this slide, I think it should compel us to adopt the policy that medicine has, which is do no harm. And with that, I'd like to transition to Luke, who's going to talk more specifically about some of the challenges and salient trends and issues that impact the experiences and outcomes for veteran men of color.
In recent years, there has been a large number of veterans who have been returning home from conflicts, namely Operation Iraqi Freedom, as well as Operation Enduring Freedom. Troop withdrawals in Iraq and Afghanistan have resulted in a large number of veterans who are seeking opportunities in their post-war and post-conflict lives. As noted by De La Garza and colleagues, as with veteran men from prior wars and conflict, many of these men are entering into post-secondary education, seeing education as a primary pathway for social and economic mobility in their lives. The high proportion of veteran men entering college is partly a function of the post-9/11 GI benefits, which afford veterans some resources to help engage in educational pursuits. Like men of color in post-secondary education, the community college has become a central pathway for veteran students. In fact, data from the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study has found that 67.6% of all male military veterans in public post-secondary education attend community colleges. Yes, 67.6%. An even higher percentage of Black and Latino veterans attend community colleges, 69.5% for Latino, and an even higher rate at 76% for Black men. The research literature on veterans demonstrates that they experience feelings of disconnectedness, isolation, and discomfort in college settings. According to D'Aramio Inspire 2011, this is a result of losing peer bonds, transitioning to a new identity, and losing structure in their lives as a result of completing their service in the military. In addition, research has shown that veteran students experience risk factors that are commonly shared by adult learners from other populations. For example, they are often employed full-time, have delayed their enrollment into post-secondary education, are responsible for caring and providing for dependents, and are enrolled part-time. If you have tuned into our webinars before, you may have heard us talk about the prevalence of stressful life events for men of color. In our research, we have found that Black and Latino men experience 4 to 5 major stressful life events in a 2-year time frame. In that research, we have highlighted examples of stressful life events including divorce, incarceration, a major relationship breakup, eviction, or major health concerns. Similarly, veteran men of color are often exposed to high levels of stressful life events. But what sets them apart is the nature of the stressful life events that they may encounter. For example, De La Garza, Manuel, Wood, and Harris have noted that examples of stressful life events for military and veteran students can include the death of a colleague in combat, experiencing and surviving single or multiple combat engagements, witnessing and having colleagues wounded in combat, and actually being wounded themselves. In fact, according to Ackerman and colleagues 2009, while there are significant psychological effects for combat exposure, some combat veterans have reported that the stressful life events involved with combat duty actually made them stronger and better able to endure the hardship and challenging life transitions, including becoming a college student. While veteran student populations often experience external pressures which can inhibit their success in college, these individuals also have important assets that can be leveraged for their success. For example, Scholarship by Lighthall 2012 demonstrates that veteran students are often mature, focused, and experienced in ways that can benefit their performance in college and in the workplace. Research on the relationships between faculty and veteran students presents a complex picture of producing added challenges to their learning and in some cases being supportive of their academic journeys. Specifically, some research has shown that faculty members can serve as critical agents of support for veteran men, especially when these faculty members have themselves experienced military service or have family members who have experienced military service. Guided by this greater level of insight, these faculty went above and beyond to ensure that veteran students were receiving necessary supports. In contrast, some faculty served as barriers to the inclusion of veteran men. This is particularly true when statements are made that are political in nature, particularly sentiments that express a lack of support for the types of military conflicts that these men may have spent their military careers supporting. Recognizing that not all campus environments provide the same level of support for veterans as others, the Obama administration created a military-friendly college designation through an executive order. The order created a program called 8 Keys to Veteran Success, where colleges could self-register as being military-friendly institutions if they committed to implementing programs for veteran populations. Examples of the 8 criteria including creating a culture of trust for veteran students, ensuring consistent support for veterans from the campus leadership, implementing early alert systems, and providing comprehensive professional development for faculty and staff on veteran issues. One of our colleagues and students, Junie Heinemann, examined this designation in an article titled, "Do Community Colleges' Military-Friendly Designations Make a Difference?" that was published in the Journal of Progressive Policy and Practice. Using data from the Community College Survey of Men focused on veteran men, among other findings, she found that at colleges registered as military-friendly, there's actually a lower level of sense of validation from faculty reported by veteran students, meaning that these students were less likely to hear critical messages like, "You can do it," "You belong here," "You can succeed," "I believe in you." Moreover, she also found that veteran students reported lower levels of belonging than non-veteran students. Her research is an indictment of campuses that espouse greater resources and support for veterans, but ultimately do not deliver on that promise. Now we'd like to show you a couple of demographic characteristics relevant to veteran men. This data is from the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study, which is a national sample of students who attend institutions that grant financial aid. It is important to recognize that a sizable population of Black and Latino men are veterans. In fact, 7.1% of Black men enrolled in community colleges have an affiliation with the military, as either active duty, reserves, veterans, or other status. Of this percent, the lion's share, 89%, are veterans. This is the second highest percentage of veterans for any racial, ethnic, and gender group in the community college. For Latino men, 7.3% have a military affiliation. Of those, 75% were identified as veterans. Like other men of color, we have learned through our analyses that veteran men are often first generation. Even more so, more of them are actually the first in their families, the first sibling to go to college. Specifically, 58.5% of Black men and 55.1% of Latino men were the first siblings in their families to do so. Like other first-generation collegians, veteran men of color have high rates of involvement in remedial and developmental education. For example, 44% of Black veteran men and 48% of Latino veteran men had to take developmental education courses. These percentages were markedly higher than that of the only 34% of white men who had to do so. High percentages of participation in developmental education should be expected, given that these men have been away from college-specific training in traditional formats for several years. For example, if a student hasn't taken a pre-calculus or algebra course in 5 or 6 years, and then takes an assessment test on these subjects, it is expected that they should need some additional support in being reoriented to these concepts. However, what is disappointing is the high degree of variation in the participation in remediation between men of color who are veterans and their white peers, who are 10 to 14% higher than that of their peers. Finally, it is important to recognize that some veteran men have experienced trauma in what they have experienced or seen. This trauma can have an influence on their learning, especially during the initial transition into college. A striking result from our analyses were that approximately 25% of black veteran men reported having difficulties concentrating, remembering information, or making decisions. This rate was markedly higher than that of white men who are veterans at 14.7%, and speaks to experiences with trauma and the effect that they can have on learning, and how support structures need to be developed to better support these men. This chart depicts enrollment percentages for veteran men in the community college. Part-time enrollment is reflected in blue, while full-time enrollment is depicted in red. For black males, 35.6% of veterans are enrolled part-time. An even higher percentage of Latino men, at 47.9%, are enrolled part-time. This is a critical point, as the average certificate, degree, or attainment rate for black and Latino men who are part-timers ranges from only 5 to 8% when they are enrolled exclusively part-time. Thus, this pattern is very concerning. Extensive research on men of color has documented that part-time enrollment is also a function of working, which can contribute then to the part-time status, which can then be associated with lower levels of achievement. This chart depicts those working patterns for black and Latino veteran men. As you can see, 44% of black men and 60% of Latino men work. While the pattern isn't strikingly high for black males, this rate of employment among Latino men is very high. Even more interesting is that about 27% of black veterans and 36% of Latino veterans work full-time. Full-time employment is often associated with high levels of attrition. However, one positive finding from our analysis of the federal data is that many of these men who had jobs that were relevant to their major or coursework. In fact, 77.9% of black men and 85.3% of Latino men reported having jobs that were directly connected to their majors or coursework. This is important, as prior research on men of color has found that their coursework, when it's connected to their jobs, is more likely to lead to academic success. As part of the work we do in learning about the experiences of men of color across community colleges in this nation, we have engaged in assessments of these men, using quantitative procedures, using interviews, using focus groups to better understand the experiences that they've had. Using a subset of that data, we've tried to illuminate some of the trends and patterns that we are seeing that may be specific or more acute for veteran men. In terms of our qualitative data, a very recurrent theme that we've seen are challenges with financial support. Here are a few quotes that help to demonstrate that. This quote is from a veteran male in a community college. "I basically have no money at the beginning of the semester. I get a little bit of money from my veterans benefits a few days before school starts to pay for books and other basic needs. That goes pretty fast. Once that money is spent, I am literally broke until my financial aid kicks in, which can be a month or so into the semester." Here's a quote from another student. "I'm a veteran, but I'm not using my benefits right now. I'm saving them for when I transfer. But I'm only able to do that because my parents let me live with them. I also don't have a car or a cell phone." Again, not having a car or having a cell phone, issues that are associated with these financial challenges, but issues that can also influence student success in school. Here's a quote from another student. "Don't get me wrong. The financial support that I get as a veteran helps. It definitely helps. And I'm grateful for it. But is it enough to take care of all my basic needs? It's not enough. So I constantly find myself scraping to make ends meet. I borrow money, I ask for rides, I don't have internet access at home or a cell phone, I got a part-time work-study job on campus. I do all this stuff just to make the little bit that I have to stretch as far as possible. Recurrent in the themes from these financial challenges are issues relevant to transportation concerns for some of these students. These quotes help to demonstrate some of those challenges that we see. Here's one from a student. I have to ask for rides from friends to get to campus, so I occasionally will bum rides. Another student says, the bus passes help a lot because they reduce the cost of getting to college. That said, it's still like $40 for the passes. It's just too much. I need the pass cost reduced even more. It would really help me to get to school. Another student says, I get to campus and back from campus through my friends. I get rides from them all week long, but sometimes it's tough. Getting to school can be a challenge for me. Now I'd like to turn our attention to some of the quantitative findings we've had with this population. On this slide, you see a mock-up of some of the reports that we have for the Community College Survey of Men. Again, the Community College Survey of Men is a national tool that we use. It's an institutional level needs assessment that's designed to better have insights on the experiences and outcomes for men of color in community colleges. Really, the tool looks at contributors to success. When we partner with colleges, we present colleges with a report that looks somewhat like this. A straightforward report that helps to identify areas where the college is doing well and areas in need of enhanced attention. And what we do is, in the instrument, we have about 120 questions that are broken down to about 32 questioning blocks. Those questions look at areas relevant to our socio-ecological outcomes model, including background and defining factors, societal factors, campus ethos factors, environmental factors, academic factors, and non-cognitive factors, including identity. Each of those different boxes represented by those factors is associated with a litany of different questions that helps to better portray what is taking place with particular student groups. As you'll see on this slide, one of the factors that we look at within the campus ethos domain is validation. On this slide, you'll see that we have 3 separate questions for validation for faculty, one looking at the messages they communicate to students about their abilities to do the work, the second one about their ability to succeed, the third one about whether they belong at the institution, and then you'll see that we have those same questions but with focus on staff. So whether staff members communicate to students that they have the ability to do the work, whether they have the ability to succeed, and whether they belong at the institution. Our reports are disaggregated by racial, ethnic, and gender group. Typically, in one of our reports, Asian American will be disaggregated into several groups, including Southeast Asian, Filipino, Pacific Islander, South Asian, and other groups. In this report, we had to aggregate it in order to help to show some of the trends and patterns that we're seeing. So what you'll see is on the top side, you'll have our racial ethnic groups that we're showing here. White, Asian, Black, Mexicano, which is students of Mexican and Mexican American descent, and Latino, who are students who are Latino but of non-Mexican and Mexican American descent. Now what we do is we do a color coding for ease of interpretation. Yellow represents, in this case, immediate concern, right? This is an area that is the worst, that needs immediate intervention, that is of concern. If we're thinking about a triage approach, this is where we want to start our efforts. Red is an area that needs attention, it's important, and it should be worked on, but it is not as acute as the yellow. And then in a subsequent slide, you'll see green, and green represents acceptable levels. How we do our work is we basically survey students using classroom-based survey tools. From those survey tools, we basically gather the data and then look at areas where students have levels of disagreement with certain statements and where they say and respond no or never to certain statements. Based upon threshold scores that we've pre-identified, we then determine what areas are acceptable, in need of attention, or in need of immediate attention. In need of immediate attention is something that is of great concern. So in this chart, you'll see that for veteran men who are in community colleges, validation from faculty and staff is a recurrent pattern that we are seeing across the data from many of the campuses that we've partnered with in terms of challenges that students are facing. Now, as you can see, faculty validation for ability and faculty validation for students' abilities to succeed. For Asian American and Black, those are areas that need attention, that are important, but are not as acute as all the other patterns that are showing across the other ethnic groups. What this does in this picture is helps to paint an image that many of these men are not receiving those critical messages which we know are essential for their success. Again, messages like you can do it, you belong here, you can succeed, I believe in you. These are important messages for all students, and also, as we would argue, given the acute challenges that some veteran men face, even more important for them. On this slide, we present the same thing, but looking at the concept of engagement. We're looking here on this slide at 4 different types of engagement, particularly as it relates to engagement with faculty. The first one is engagement with faculty and having conversations with them about academic matters inside a class. The second one is about having conversations with them about academic matters outside of class. The third one is having conversations and engagements with them about non-academic matters outside of class. And the fourth one is for the student to engage in checking in on their progress in the course as it relates to their grades. Now, in this chart, you'll see areas where there's acceptable levels of engagement, areas where there needs attention, and also, again, areas that are in need of immediate attention. So, from this, we can see that in terms of engagement with faculty, in terms of academic matters inside a class, there are acceptable levels for white, Asian, and Black veteran men, but for Latino men, there's an area that's in need of attention, and for Mexicano men, there's areas in need of immediate attention. We can see that there are also acute reporting across ethnic groups for engagement about academic matters outside of class and non-academic matters outside of class. In addition, on the last slide, we can see that for almost all the groups, there are areas in need of immediate attention, but there's also concerning levels and patterns of engagement that are being experienced by Black men as it relates to checking in on their progress and grades. Now, from the work that we've done, many of you have become familiar with our concept of welcomeness to engage. So from our perspective, when we see challenges that look like this in terms of engagement, we believe that it is indicative of a climate where students do not feel welcome to engage in that classroom. Welcome to engage with faculty inside the class and welcome to engage with them outside of class, because we believe that is a foundational precondition for the actual engagement that is being measured on this slide. Another area that we looked at is feeling of connections on campus. As you can see with some of this data, there are some major concerns that are being and emerging from the national data that we have. For Latino men and Mexicano men across the board, there are critical areas that are in need. Students are in these areas who are veteran men do not feel that they have connections with faculty, that they have connections with students, that they have connections with office staff, and that they have connections with the general campus environment. And while we see that for Black men there are fewer areas in need of immediate attention and more areas in need of attention at kind of a lower level of concern, it still demonstrates a pattern that students on across campuses who are veteran men are feeling disconnected from their faculty, their peers, the office staff, and from the campus in general. Now, These are some of the slides that we saw that dealt with some of the more acute challenges that men have faced. One slide that we didn't show is about low levels of belonging from faculty and students. So one of the things that we saw in analyzing our data is that students do not feel that they have a sense of belonging from faculty, in that they don't believe that faculty members believe they belong in class, care about their perspectives in class, value their presence in class, want to interact with them in class. That these perceptions about whether the faculty members believe they belong are very low across the board for these men, and basically areas that are in need of immediate attention. Even more acute than that were the responses that we saw as it relates to students' perceptions of belonging from other students. So veteran students' perceptions of whether other students believe that they belong there. The rates that we saw are some of the highest rates of concern across all the assessment data that we have in looking at specific student subgroups. What we have come to recognize is that these men do not feel connected to the environment in terms of connections and in terms of perceptions of belonging. This, of course, based upon extensive research literature, demonstrates concerning patterns that must be taken into account for veteran men in order for campuses to facilitate their parity, inclusion, and excellence. What we'd like to do is to conclude this webinar recording with a set of discussion questions. Typically, we would conclude our recordings with recommendations for practice. Given that the research we are doing in this area is still yet new, and that there is not a large body of literature on veteran men of color to pull from at this point that focuses on community college context, we thought it might be more appropriate to conclude this webinar video with discussion questions that can help facilitate further conversation, dialogue around strategies that can be used to improve their success. Here are the 4 questions. 1. Given the salient trends and issues that impact student success for veteran men of color, what student services practices can be employed to enhance sense of belonging among veteran men of color? 2. What are some strategies that can be employed by faculty, classroom faculty, to enhance engagement among veteran men of color? 3. How might campuses create spaces and opportunities for veteran men of color to build and sustain communities of support? And 4. What lines of inquiry must be pursued in order to better understand the ways in which veteran men of color experience your campus and campuses around the country? We encourage you to take these questions if you're sitting in groups, if you're by yourself, and to contemplate what are some appropriate answers that can help us to move this agenda forward in creating better strategies and lines of inquiry to support veteran men in our community colleges. At this point, if you're going to engage in those conversations, we invite you to press pause on your slide. Thank you for attending this webinar recording where we have provided some initial insights into the work that's being done on veteran men and community colleges, serving those who have served us, veteran men of color in the community college. We hope that you will continue these conversations and dialogue in order to provide better systems of support, access, and completion for our veteran men.